The worst part about sharing one hotel room with your best friend wasn't the sleeping arrangement. It was pretending I didn't notice how good he looked standing there in nothing but gray sweatpants, arguing with the air conditioner like it had personally offended him. "This thing sounds like a dying lawn mower," Miles muttered, smacking the side of the unit beneath the window. I laughed from the edge of the bed. "Maybe if you hit it harder, it'll respect you." He turned to glare at me, dark curls messy from the long drive, lips pressed into that annoyed line he always got when he was tired. "Brody, I swear to God." The air conditioner rattled violently and then shut off completely. We both froze. Then I burst out laughing. Miles pointed at it dramatically. "You see? This is your fault." "My fault? You manifested that." "Yeah, because I secretly wanted us to sweat to death in a roadside hotel in the middle of Colorado." He tried not to smile. Failed immediately. That was the problem with Miles. Even after knowing him for 7 years, he could still knock the air out of me with something as simple as a grin. We'd been best friends since freshman year of college. Same dorm floor. Same sarcastic sense of humor. Same habit of staying up too late talking about absolutely nothing. Somewhere along the way, he became the person I called first for everything. Good news. Bad news. Existential crisis at 2 in the morning. And somehow, despite all of that, I'd managed to keep one very important detail hidden from him. I was hopelessly in love with him. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way. Worse, in the quiet, permanent kind of way. The kind that settled into your chest and started feeling like part of your personality. "You're staring again," Miles said. I blinked. "What?" "You do that when you zone out." He tossed his hoodie onto the chair near the window. "It's creepy. Maybe you're just very stare-able." That sounded illegal. I smirked. "Relax. I'm sleep-deprived." Which was true. We both were. The road trip had been Miles' idea. 10 days across 3 states before real adulthood swallowed us whole. He was starting a finance job in Chicago next month. I was moving to Seattle for grad school. This trip was supposed to be one last stretch of freedom before our lives split in different directions. And apparently, that freedom included one terrible hotel room because somebody forgot to book separate beds. "You took care of the reservation," I reminded him. "And you said, 'Don't worry about it, man. I'm easy.'" "I meant emotionally." Miles snorted and finally dropped onto the second bed. The mattress squealed loud enough to sound injured. We both looked at it. "This place definitely has ghosts," he said. "Cheap ghosts. Budget-friendly spirits." I laughed again, softer this time. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. The neon motel sign flickered red through the curtains, washing the room in dim color every few seconds. It felt strangely intimate. Too intimate. I grabbed my phone just to have something to do with my hands. Miles was still talking, rambling now about the gas station cashier who'd flirted with me earlier. "She literally gave you free candy," he said. "She gave everybody free candy." "Nope. She wanted you." "I think she wanted me to leave. She looked disappointed when you walked out." I shrugged. "Maybe she sensed I'm emotionally unavailable." Miles laughed at that, but then he got quieter. "You are, though," he said after a second. I looked up. "What?" "You never date anyone seriously." There was no accusation in his voice, just curiosity. Still, my stomach tightened. Maybe I haven't met the right person. The words came out too honest. Miles leaned back against the headboard, watching me carefully now. "You ever think," he said slowly, "that maybe you just wait too long?" Meaning? "Meaning you feel things and then overthink them until the moment's gone." I forced a smile. That sounded suspiciously specific. "Probably because I know you." Yeah, that was exactly the problem. He knew me better than anyone else alive, and somehow still didn't know the biggest thing about me. The room went quiet after that. Not awkward quiet. The dangerous kind. The kind where every small movement suddenly feels louder than it should. Miles stretched his arms above his head, shirt lifting slightly before he dropped them again. My eyes betrayed me for half a second. Unfortunately, half a second was enough. His eyebrows lifted. "You're staring again." "Shut up." He laughed softly and reached for the remote, flipping through channels aimlessly. "You know what's weird?" he said. "What?" "We've never actually traveled alone together before." I frowned. "That's not true. College trips don't count. There were always other people." He had a point. This was different. Just us. Long drives. Late nights. Shared hotel rooms. Too much time to think. Too much time noticing things. Like how he always stole blankets in his sleep. How he absent-mindedly hummed when he brushed his teeth. How he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention. That last one was new, and I was trying very hard not to read into it. Miles muted the TV suddenly. Can I ask you something weird? My chest tightened instantly. That depends how weird. He hesitated. Actually hesitated, which almost never happened with him. Have you ever almost told someone something and then stopped because you knew it would change everything? The question hit me so hard I forgot how to breathe for a second. I stared at him. He wasn't joking anymore. The red motel light flickered across his face again, painting shadows across his expression. What kind of thing? I asked carefully. Miles looked down at the remote in his hands. The kind you can't take back. My pulse started climbing. Fast. Dangerously fast. Because suddenly the room felt smaller. Warmer. Like something had shifted without warning. And for the first time since this trip started, I had the terrifying feeling that maybe I wasn't the only one hiding something. I didn't answer him right away. Because honestly, I couldn't. The question sat between us like live electricity. Have you ever almost told someone something and then stopped because you knew it would change everything? Miles still wasn't looking at me. He kept turning the remote over in his hands, thumb tapping nervously against the buttons. That alone was enough to make my chest tighten. Miles didn't get nervous. Not really. He was usually the confident one, the easy one, the guy who could walk into any room and somehow belong there within 5 minutes. But now he looked uncertain, and suddenly I was terrified to say the wrong thing. Yeah, I admitted quietly. I have. His eyes lifted to mine immediately. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he nodded once, slow. Okay, he murmured, almost to himself. I swallowed hard. What brought this on? Miles leaned back against the headboard again, exhaling through his nose. I don't know, he said. This trip, maybe. That's vague. I'm trying to be vague. That made my stomach flip. I forced out a laugh. Usually when people say stuff like this, they're about to confess to murder. He smiled faintly. Good news. I haven't killed anyone. Comforting. But I might ruin our friendship. The words landed hard. My heartbeat stumbled so badly I was sure he could hear it. Miles, I'm serious. He looked at me directly now. And before you say anything, I know this is a terrible time to bring it up. Bring what up? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he shook his head suddenly and stood up from the bed. Nope, he muttered. Bad idea. I blinked. What? I'm not doing this in a motel that smells like wet carpet. Despite everything, I laughed. Miles, I'm serious, he said, pacing now. This is not the setting for a life-changing conversation. You're the one who started it. Yeah, and now I regret having emotions. That's new. He pointed at me accusingly. Don't make jokes right now. I'm fragile. I stared at him for a second before smiling despite myself. God, this was exactly why I loved him. Even panicking, he was still Miles. Still somehow making me feel lighter while my chest was actively collapsing in on itself. He stopped pacing eventually and looked over at me again. The tension came rushing back immediately. You know what the problem is? He said quietly. What? You matter too much to me. My breath caught. The room suddenly felt dead silent except for the rain outside. Miles. I mean it, he said. You're my person, Brody. That word hit deeper than it should have. My person. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck, visibly frustrated now. I don't know when it happened exactly, he admitted. Maybe sophomore year. Maybe before that. But somewhere along the line, you became the first thing I think about when something happens. I couldn't move. Could barely breathe. And lately, he continued carefully, it's been getting harder to pretend that's all it is. Every nerve in my body lit up at once. Because there it was. Not fully spoken. Not clearly defined. But there. The thing I'd wanted for years and never let myself hope for. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly. Seriously. I know this is probably weird as hell for you. Weird wasn't the word. Impossible was closer. I stood up too fast, nearly hitting my knee against the bed frame. Miles immediately looked alarmed. You okay? Yeah, I said automatically. Lie. Complete lie. I walked toward the window mostly because I needed somewhere else to look. Rain streaked down the glass outside. Cars hissed across the wet highway nearby. The motel sign buzzed softly in the dark. Behind me, Miles stayed quiet, giving me space, which somehow made this harder. You know what's funny? I said finally. What? I thought I was really good at hiding things. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I turned around slowly. Miles, I said, my voice already betraying me. I've been in love with you for like 3 years. Silence. Actual silence. His face went completely blank for a second. Not cold, not upset, just stunned. You're kidding. I shook my head once. No. The way he looked at me after that was almost worse than if he'd rejected me. Because suddenly everything in his expression cracked open at once. Relief. Disbelief. Something dangerously close to happiness. Brody, he said softly, what? I laughed nervously and scrubbed both hands over my face. Yeah. Surprise. You've seriously? Yes. For 3 years. At least. His jaw dropped slightly. And you never said anything? I stared at him. You were my best friend. What exactly was the winning scenario there? He sat back down slowly like his legs stopped working properly. That's insane. Correct. You acted completely normal. I deserve an Oscar. That finally made him laugh. A real laugh. Short and disbelieving and slightly overwhelmed. Then he looked at me again. And the room changed. I don't know how else to explain it. Nothing physically shifted. Nobody moved closer. But suddenly, every glance felt loaded with years of things we never said. Miles leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. So all those times you got weird when I dated someone. I wasn't weird. You were absolutely weird. Okay, fine. A little weird. A little. He looked genuinely offended now. You once disappeared for 6 hours because I mentioned a girl from my economics class. She had a terrible vibe. Miles laughed again, shaking his head. Oh my God. What? You were jealous. I was suffering silently. Thank you. He looked at me for a long moment after that. Softly. Almost carefully. And then he said the thing that nearly stopped my heart entirely. I think I've been waiting for you to tell me. My pulse slammed hard against my ribs. What? He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. I didn't understand what I was feeling at first, he admitted. I just knew nobody else ever felt right after you. I forgot how to breathe again. Miles stood up slowly this time. Neither of us spoke. The space between us suddenly felt very small. You know what really messed me up? He asked quietly. What? The way you always looked at me like you were trying not to. That one nearly destroyed me. Because he noticed. All this time he noticed. You noticed that? I whispered. Miles smiled faintly. Brody, he said softly, I notice everything about you. And there it was again. That terrifying feeling from earlier. Only stronger now. Like the entire shape of my life was quietly changing inside this awful little motel room. Neither of us moved. That was the strange part. After years of wanting him, imagining this exact moment in 100 different ways, I thought something dramatic would happen. A kiss. A confession. Some giant cinematic shift. Instead, we just stood there staring at each other while the motel air conditioner made one sad rattling noise before dying again completely. Miles looked over at it. Then back at me. Wow, he said quietly. Even the hotel couldn't handle this conversation. I laughed so suddenly it startled both of us. The tension cracked just enough for us to breathe again. Come here, he said softly. That almost ruined me. Not because of the words themselves. Because of the way he said them. Gentle. Certain. Like he already knew I would. I crossed the room slowly, heart hammering so hard it felt painful. Miles stayed still until I stopped directly in front of him. Close enough now that I could see every tiny shift in his expression. He looked nervous. That honestly shocked me more than anything else. You're nervous? I asked quietly. He gave me a disbelieving look. Brody, I just found out my best friend has secretly been in love with me for years. Fair. And apparently I've been in love with him too. So yeah, I'm a little nervous. My stomach flipped violently. Hearing him say it out loud felt unreal. In love. Not maybe. Not confused. Not almost. I stared at him for a second too long. Miles smiled faintly. You're staring again. Sorry. Don't apologize. That one sentence settled somewhere deep inside my chest. Don't apologize. God. If he kept talking to me like that, I was genuinely going to lose my mind. You know what's embarrassing? He admitted quietly. What? I thought you were out of my league. I blinked so hard it physically hurt. Miles. I'm serious. You're objectively insane. No, listen. He rubbed the back of his neck again, clearly embarrassed now. You always seemed so emotionally put together. I actually laughed at that. Me? Yeah. I've been internally screaming around you since junior year. That made him grin. Okay, that actually explains a lot. Oh, does it? You remember Connor's birthday party? I frowned. Vaguely. You got mad at me because some girl sat next to me. I did not get mad. You called her spiritually irritating. She was spiritually irritating. Miles laughed hard enough to bend forward slightly. And suddenly this didn't feel terrifying anymore. It felt familiar. Still us. Just honest now. The realization hit me all at once. Nothing about the foundation between us had changed. We still laughed the same way. Still understood each other instantly. Still fit together naturally. The only difference was that now I knew why. Miles looked at me again after the laughter faded. Softer this time. You really never knew? He asked quietly. Knew what? That I felt it too. I swallowed hard. No. He shook his head slowly like he couldn't believe that. I thought I was obvious. You were not obvious. Brody, I literally drove 12 hours just to spend more time alone with you before you moved away. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Oh. Yeah. Oh. That suddenly feels less subtle in retrospect. Miles smirked. Thank you. I leaned back against the desk beside the window, trying to steady my heartbeat. This is insane. A little. You realize we're probably going to overanalyze this entire conversation tomorrow. Oh, absolutely. I laughed quietly. Then the reality underneath everything hit me again. I was moving to Seattle in 3 weeks. Miles was moving to Chicago. And suddenly the timing of all this felt almost cruel. Apparently, he thought the same thing because his expression shifted too. You're leaving, he said quietly. The warmth in the room dimmed slightly. Yeah. And I'm leaving. Yeah. Neither of us spoke for a second. Rain kept tapping softly against the windows. Miles looked down at the carpet briefly before speaking again. I almost didn't say anything because of that. Why did you? He met my eyes immediately. Because the idea of never telling you felt worse. That one hit deep. Painfully deep. I looked away first this time. Because suddenly my chest felt too full. Too many years. Too many almost moments. Too much happening all at once. Miles stood up again slowly. Hey, he said gently. I looked back at him. We don't have to figure everything out tonight. I nodded once. But the thing was, I wanted to. Not logistics. Not long-distance plans. Not the future. Just this. Us. The truth of it. I think, I said carefully. I need to ask you something. Miles' expression softened immediately. Okay. If I had told you earlier, my voice caught slightly. Would you have wanted this then too? His answer came instantly. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just yes. I looked down hard enough to avoid completely combusting. Miles. I mean it. His voice got quieter. I think I've wanted you for longer than I understood what wanting you actually meant. The room felt unbearably warm now. He stepped closer again. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just enough that I could feel his presence fully now. You know what finally gave it away for me? He asked softly. What? The thought of you falling in love with someone else made me physically miserable. I laughed weakly. That's actually horrifyingly romantic. It was horrifying in general. And your solution was a cross-country emotional breakdown. Correct. I smiled despite myself. Then his expression changed again. More serious now. Careful. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Miles hesitated. Then very quietly. Have you ever wanted to kiss me? Every coherent thought left my body instantly. Because there it was. The thing hanging underneath this entire night. The thing we'd somehow been circling around for hours. I stared at him. He looked nervous again suddenly, like maybe he'd pushed too far. Which was ridiculous considering I'd dreamed about this exact moment more times than I could count. Yes, I admitted softly. Miles' eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before returning to mine. Okay, he whispered. Neither of us moved. But now the air between us felt impossibly thin. Like one more second of hesitation might actually kill me. Miles looked at me like he was trying very hard not to cross some invisible line too fast. Which was funny considering we'd already emotionally detonated our entire friendship in the span of one motel night. Still, neither of us moved. The space between us stayed painfully small. Brody, he said quietly, you're thinking too hard again. I literally can't feel my heartbeat correctly. That's fair. You asked if I wanted to kiss you. I did. And now you're just standing there. A slow smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. You want me to stop standing here? No. I admitted immediately. His expression softened so fast it hurt. God, I was never surviving this. Miles reached up carefully, like he was giving me every possible chance to pull away, and touched the side of my face. Just that. Nothing dramatic. But the second his hand settled there, something inside me completely unraveled. Because this was real. Actually real. Not another almost. Not another private fantasy I'd replay later when I was alone. Miles looked at me the same way I'd looked at him for years. Like he wanted me. Like it mattered. You know what's crazy? He murmured. What? I thought this would feel scarier. My voice came out quieter than intended. What does it feel like? He smiled a little. Like finally telling the truth. That one nearly destroyed me. I think he saw it happen too because his thumb brushed lightly along my cheek before he leaned in slowly. Still careful. Still giving me time. I closed the distance first. Barely. Just enough. And then we kissed. It wasn't intense. Wasn't messy. Wasn't cinematic. It was soft. Almost painfully soft. Like both of us were trying to understand something we'd wanted for too long. The second it happened, every year of hidden feelings crashed into me at once. All the almost moments. All the jealousy. All the late-night conversations where we'd been standing right at the edge of this without knowing how to step over it. Miles made a quiet sound against my mouth that absolutely ruined me. Then suddenly he was smiling into the kiss. Actually smiling. Which made me laugh too, because apparently even this felt natural with him. When we pulled apart slightly, neither of us went very far. His forehead rested lightly against mine. Well, he whispered. Well, I echoed. That was significantly better than my previous strategy. Breaking into my emotional walls through hotel trauma? Exactly. I laughed softly, still dizzy. Miles looked at me for another long second before speaking again. You know what really kills me? What? You kissed exactly how I thought you would. I blinked. You imagined kissing me? He gave me a flat look. Brody, be serious. That made my entire face heat instantly. Oh my God, you think you were the only one secretly pathetic here? I wasn't prepared to hear that out loud. Miles laughed quietly and leaned back just enough to actually look at me again. There was something different in his expression now. Not uncertainty. Not tension. Relief. Like he'd been carrying this for a long time too. I can't believe we wasted this much time, he admitted. We were idiots. We were catastrophic idiots. Emotionally repressed idiots. That too. I smiled helplessly. Then the reality underneath everything crept back in again. Seattle. Chicago. 3 weeks. Apparently Miles felt the shift too because his smile faded slightly. You're thinking again, he murmured. Can you blame me? No. The room got quiet again. Not bad quiet. Just honest. Miles sat down on the edge of the bed and looked up at me. I don't know what happens after this, he admitted. Neither did I. And honestly, that terrified me. Because now that I knew he loved me too, the idea of losing him somehow felt even worse. I wish the timing wasn't so awful, I said quietly. Miles nodded immediately. Yeah. He rubbed both hands over his face before exhaling hard. I almost told you last spring. I blinked. What? At your apartment. I frowned slightly, trying to remember. The night your power went out, he said. And suddenly I remembered everything. The storm. Candles everywhere because neither of us could find a flashlight. Miles sitting on my kitchen counter at 2 in the morning talking to me about absolutely nothing for hours because neither of us wanted to sleep yet. You kept looking at me weird that night. I realized. I was trying not to kiss you. My heart did something deeply unhealthy. Miles, I'm serious. You were sitting there in that gray hoodie and laughing at my terrible stories, and I remember thinking, if I don't leave right now, I'm going to ruin my life. I stared at him. Instead, he continued, I went home and spent 6 straight months pretending I was normal about you. That must have been difficult. It was horrible. I laughed again, softer this time. God, the fact that we'd both been carrying the same feelings all this time felt surreal. Like finding out 2 people had been speaking different versions of the same language for years without realizing it. Miles reached for my hand suddenly. Instinctively. Like he'd done it 1,000 times already. My chest tightened immediately. Because somehow this felt even more intimate than the kiss. His fingers threaded carefully through mine. Easy. Natural. Dangerously perfect. You know what scares me, he admitted quietly. What? That this already feels important enough to hurt. That one landed directly in the center of my chest. Because I understood exactly what he meant. This wasn't casual. Wasn't temporary. Wasn't some random impulsive moment during a road trip. This was years of loving each other finally catching up to us. And suddenly the future felt terrifying. Miles looked at me carefully. But I still don't regret telling you. I squeezed his hand once before I could overthink it. Good, I said softly. He smiled again after that. Smaller this time. Realer somehow. Then he glanced toward the terrible floral curtains covering the motel window. You realize this place is permanently part of our lore now. I laughed immediately. I hate that sentence. You know I'm right. We could have at least had this emotional breakthrough somewhere less haunted. Miles grinned, then quieter. Still worth it, though. And the way he looked at me after saying it made my entire chest ache in the best possible way. We stayed up almost the entire night. Not because anything dramatic happened. Neither of us seemed ready to let the moment end. It felt too fragile somehow. Too important. So instead, we talked. Really talked. Miles lay across his bed while I sat against the headboard of mine, our feet almost touching in the narrow space between them. Every once in a while, one of us would smile for no reason at all, and the other would immediately notice. "You keep doing that," Miles murmured at one point. "What? That look?" I frowned. "What look?" "The one where you suddenly remember this is real." I looked down, embarrassed immediately. "Sorry." "There you go, apologizing again." I laughed quietly. "I genuinely don't know how to act right now." "Good," he said softly. "Me neither." The rain finally stopped sometime after 2 in the morning. The silence afterward felt strangely intimate, like the whole world had gone still around us. Miles rolled onto his side to face me fully. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" "Always." "I used to think you were way too good for me." I stared at him. "Miles." "No, seriously." He pointed at me dramatically. "You're smart. Emotionally stable. People actually listen when you talk." "Emotionally stable?" I repeated incredulously. "You seem emotionally stable." "I've been secretly in love with my best friend for years." "Yeah, but you hit it with incredible professionalism." I laughed so hard I had to lean forward slightly. "That might be the saddest compliment anyone's ever given me." "I'm being vulnerable here." "You're being ridiculous." Miles smiled softly, then quieter. "I mean it, though." The warmth in my chest turned almost painful again, because I knew exactly what he meant. I'd spent years assuming someone like Miles could never really want me the same way. Too confident, too easy with people, too magnetic. I thought eventually he'd fall in love with someone effortless and bright and uncomplicated. Not me. Not the guy who spent 3 years rehearsing fake casual responses every time Miles looked too good in sunlight. "You know what's really messed up?" I admitted quietly. "What?" "I convinced myself I'd rather stay miserable forever than risk losing you." His expression changed instantly. Softened. "Brody, I mean it." I shrugged helplessly. "You were the most important person in my life already. If I told you, and it went badly," my throat tightened slightly. "I couldn't survive losing both things." Miles got quiet after that. Not uncomfortable quiet. Thinking quiet. Then he stood up suddenly. I blinked. "What are you doing?" "Come here." I stared at him suspiciously. "That's exactly how people get murdered in documentaries." "Brody." "Fine." I stood up slowly and crossed the tiny motel room again. Miles reached for my hands immediately when I got close enough. His fingers were warm. "Steady." "You know what I hate," he said quietly. "What?" "That you spent all this time believing you had to earn being loved." That one hit so directly I almost looked away. But Miles tightened his hold slightly before I could. "I'm serious," he murmured. "You act like caring about you is some huge burden people have to consciously choose." My chest tightened painfully. "I don't think that." "You absolutely do." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again, because the worst part was he wasn't wrong. Miles looked at me for another long second before speaking again. "You've always been enough for me." God, that sentence settled somewhere deep enough to ache. I swallowed hard. "You really know how to emotionally devastate someone." "I've had years to prepare." I laughed weakly. Then neither of us spoke for a while. We just stood there holding each other's hands in the middle of the world's saddest motel room while neon light flickered softly across the walls. And somehow it felt perfect. Miles smiled suddenly. "What?" "I just realized something. That's usually dangerous. We've accidentally been dating for years." I snorted immediately. "Excuse me." "Think about it," he said, increasingly confident now. "We talk constantly. We prioritize each other over everyone else. We know each other's coffee orders. That doesn't mean we were dating. You literally drove 4 hours once because I said I was having a bad week." I paused. "Okay, that one sounds bad." Miles grinned triumphantly. "And every person we know already treats us like a married couple. That's because we fight like one. We also grocery shop together. We're roommates emotionally. You made me soup when I had the flu. You were dying dramatically. I had a fever. You texted me like a Victorian widow." Miles laughed hard enough to lean forward against my shoulder briefly. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. still enough to send warmth rushing straight through me. When he realized it, he didn't move away immediately. Instead, he stayed there for a second longer than necessary before lifting his head again. And suddenly the room got quiet. Again, different this time. Slower. Miles looked at me carefully. "You know," he said softly, "I think this is the first time I've ever done something scary without immediately wanting to run from it." My chest tightened. "You're not running now." He shook his head once. "No." Then after a tiny pause, "Are you?" I looked at him honestly. "Terrified?" "Absolutely." But underneath the fear was something stronger now. Relief. Finally relief. "No," I admitted quietly. Miles smiled at that. Small. Real. Beautiful enough to completely wreck me. Then his eyes drifted toward the clock beside the bed. "Brody." "What?" "It's 4 in the morning." "Oh my God. We have to leave in 6 hours." I laughed helplessly and dropped my forehead briefly against his shoulder. "We're idiots." "Catastrophic idiots," he corrected. "Emotionally compromised idiots." Deeply, neither of us moved away. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion and nerves and years of hidden feelings finally spilling open, one terrifyingly hopeful thought settled into my chest. Maybe this wasn't ruining everything. Maybe this was finally the beginning of something. The next morning felt unreal. Not bad unreal, just fragile. Like if either of us moved too fast, the entire night might collapse into something imaginary. I woke up first. For a few confused seconds, I forgot where I was entirely. Then I saw Miles asleep across the room, and every memory from the night before hit me at once. The confessions, the kiss, his hands holding mine. "You've always been enough for me." My chest immediately tightened in that dangerous warm way again. Miles was still asleep, one arm thrown over his face, blanket twisted around his legs like he'd fought it in his sleep. I smiled before I could stop myself. "You're staring again," he mumbled without moving. I jumped slightly. "You're awake." Unfortunately, his voice was rough with sleep, which absolutely did not help my emotional stability. Miles lowered his arms slowly and blinked at me from across the room. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then his expression softened all at once. "Oh," he murmured. "What?" That wasn't a dream. The way he said it nearly ruined me before 8 in the morning. I laughed quietly. "Nope." Miles smiled into the pillow for a second before sitting up slowly. His hair was a disaster. His shirt was wrinkled. And somehow he still looked unfairly good. "This is weird," he admitted. "Bad weird." He thought about it. "No," he said softly. "Actually, really good weird." Something warm spread through my chest instantly. He looked at me for another second before grinning suddenly. "You realize we have to spend 10 more hours trapped in a car together now." I groaned immediately and fell backward onto the mattress. "Oh my God. Yeah. We're going to overanalyze every interaction." I already started. "That's horrifying." Miles laughed quietly and got out of bed. The normalness of it somehow made everything feel even more intimate. Watching him grab his hoodie, watching him stretch sleepily near the window, watching him exist now with the terrifying knowledge that he loved me too. I wasn't built for this emotionally. "You good?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Yeah." "You looked overwhelmed." "I am overwhelmed." "Fair." He disappeared into the bathroom for a minute. The second the door shut, I grabbed a pillow and aggressively pressed my face into it. This could not possibly be real life. When Miles came back out, he caught me immediately. "Are you screaming into the bedding?" "No." "You absolutely are." I lifted my head reluctantly. Miles leaned against the bathroom door, smiling at me in that soft, knowing way that now carried completely different meaning. "I'm trying to process," I defended. "You're adorable when emotionally compromised." That's an evil sentence. "You like it?" Unfortunately, I did. A lot. Which was becoming a serious problem. An hour later, we were back on the road. The sky was still gray from the storm, highways stretching endlessly ahead of us while some old indie playlist hummed softly through the speakers. And somehow everything felt different now. Not dramatically, just subtly. Like every glance carried extra weight. Like every accidental touch lingered a second longer than before. Miles drove with one hand loosely against the steering wheel while I pretended very hard not to notice how pretty he looked in morning light. About 40 minutes into the drive, he glanced sideways at me. "You're doing it again." "What?" "The staring thing." "I hate that you can tell." "I can always tell." My stomach flipped immediately. Miles smiled faintly before looking back at the road. "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "How close we came to never saying anything." That quieted me instantly. Because yeah, we almost didn't. If he hadn't asked that question, if I'd laughed it off, if either of us got scared 1 second earlier, the thought made my chest ache. I think about that too, I admitted softly. Miles tapped his fingers lightly against the steering wheel. I don't like it. Me neither. Silence settled between us again. Comfortable silence. Then, so, Miles said carefully, what exactly are we doing here? I looked over at him. Meaning? He exhaled slowly. Are we pretending this was a road trip emotional breakdown? My heart sped up immediately, because underneath everything else, this was the real question now. What happens next? I looked out the window briefly before answering. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Good, he said immediately. That came out so fast it made me smile. Miles glanced at me again briefly. I'm serious. I know. Another pause. Then quieter. I don't think I can go back to being normal about you. God. Every sentence out of his mouth felt unfair now. I rubbed a hand over the back of my neck. I don't really know how this works. Neither do I. We live in different cities in 3 weeks. Yeah. The mood shifted slightly again. Not ruined. Just real. Because no matter how perfect this felt right now, reality was still waiting for us at the end of the trip. Chicago. Seattle. Different lives. Miles seemed lost in the same thoughts because his jaw tightened slightly as he drove. Then suddenly he said, I'd still rather try than spend the next 10 years wondering what would have happened. I looked at him sharply. He kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. I mean that, he added quietly. My chest hurt instantly, because I wanted that too. Terrifyingly badly. I don't know if long distance would work, I admitted honestly. Miles nodded once. I know, but I know not trying would probably kill me. That got his attention immediately. He looked over at me with something painfully soft in his expression. Brody, what? You say things that make it really hard to act normal while driving. I laughed quietly despite the tightness in my throat. Miles smiled too. Then after a second, he reached across the center console and rested his hand beside mine. Not fully touching. Just there. Waiting. The gesture felt so careful it nearly destroyed me. I looked at his hand for 1 second before sliding mine into it. Miles exhaled softly the second our fingers intertwined. And suddenly the entire car felt warm. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. We just drove through endless gray morning roads holding hands like two people trying very hard not to be afraid of how much this already mattered. By the time we crossed into Utah, everything between us had settled into something dangerously natural. Too natural. That was the problem. Miles would hand me his coffee without asking because he already knew how much cream I liked. I'd steal fries off his plate at gas stations, and he wouldn't even look surprised anymore. Every few hours, one of us would reach for the other without thinking. Like we'd been doing this forever. Maybe we had, just without admitting it. The sun finally broke through the clouds sometime that afternoon, flooding the car with warm gold light. Miles glanced over at me while stopping at a red light. You know what's weird? What? You look less stressed. I snorted softly. That's because I'm no longer carrying around a life-ending secret. Good point. He smiled for a second before growing quieter again. You used to get this look sometimes, he admitted. What look? Like you were sad before you even knew why. That caught me off guard. I looked out the window immediately. Miles. I'm serious. His voice softened. I noticed it all the time. The lump in my throat appeared so fast, it almost annoyed me. Because the truth was he'd always noticed me more carefully than anyone else ever had. Even before this. Especially before this. I think, I admitted quietly. Part of me already knew losing you would hurt eventually. Miles didn't answer immediately. When I finally looked back at him, his expression had gone painfully soft again. You're not losing me. The certainty in his voice nearly destroyed me. He reached over and squeezed my knee once before focusing back on the road. And suddenly all I could think was, I want this. I want him. I want whatever future exists where we stop pretending distance automatically means the end. That realization should have terrified me more than it did. Instead, it mostly felt relieving. Around sunset, we stopped at a small diner off the highway because Miles claimed he was seconds away from starvation. You said that 2 hours ago. I reminded him as we slid into a booth near the window. And yet somehow I survived. A medical miracle. The waitress brought us coffee while Miles studied the menu with unnecessary intensity. I mostly studied him, which, unfortunately, he caught immediately. There's the staring again. You're very stare-able. That line worked better yesterday. It's still true. Miles looked down for a second, smiling helplessly into his coffee cup. Watching him react to me now felt surreal. For years, every compliment had bounced harmlessly off him because he thought I was joking. Now he actually heard them. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't think anyone's ever looked at me the way you do." The honesty in his voice hit hard. I leaned back slightly against the booth. "That's because nobody else is me." Miles laughed softly at that. Then his expression shifted again. More thoughtful now. "Can I tell you something I haven't admitted out loud yet?" "Always." He rubbed his thumb slowly against the side of his coffee mug before speaking. "I think I started falling for you the night my dad ended up in the hospital." I blinked in surprise. "Miles, you stayed with me for 18 hours straight," he said quietly. "You didn't even go home. You just sat there with me in those awful waiting room chairs acting like it wasn't a big deal." I remembered that night perfectly. The exhaustion. Miles trying very hard not to panic. The way he finally fell asleep against my shoulder around 4 in the morning because he physically couldn't stay awake anymore. "You would have done the same for me," I said softly. "I know," he replied immediately. That's what scared me. The warmth in my chest turned almost unbearable again. Because this wasn't random. Wasn't temporary attraction. Wasn't some impulsive road trip thing. We'd been building toward this for years without realizing it. Miles smiled faintly. I remember thinking, nobody is ever going to matter to me more than this person. I looked down hard enough to avoid completely combusting in the middle of the diner. "You really need to stop saying devastating things casually. I'm trying to communicate. You're emotionally sniping me." He laughed quietly. Then after a second, "What was it for you?" I looked back at him. What was what? The moment. The moment I knew. God, there were too many. But one memory surfaced immediately. "Junior year," I said softly. Miles frowned slightly. "That narrows it down terribly. You got food poisoning." His expression immediately collapsed into horrified recognition. "Oh my God, you were so dramatic. I thought I was dying. You texted me, quote, 'If I perish, delete my browser history.'" Miles covered his face with one hand while laughing. "That cannot be the moment you fell in love with me." "No," I admitted. "But it was the moment I realized I already was." His laughter faded slowly after that. Then he looked at me with an expression so openly affectionate, it almost hurt to sit there. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to look away from it. The waitress interrupted us eventually with burgers and fries neither of us remembered ordering. Miles thanked her distractedly before looking back at me again, still smiling slightly, still looking at me like he couldn't quite believe this was real either. "You know what's terrifying?" he murmured. "What?" "I think this already feels more serious than anything I've ever had before." My pulse jumped immediately. Because same. Completely same. And judging by the look on his face, he knew it too. We got back on the road just after sunset. The sky turned deep blue behind the mountains, headlights stretching endlessly along the highway while quiet music played through the speakers. And for the first time since this trip started, silence between us didn't feel uncertain. It felt full. Miles drove one-handed again, the other resting loosely near the center console. Every few minutes his fingers brushed mine absent-mindedly, like he physically couldn't stop checking that I was still there. Honestly, same. I watched the blur of passing lights outside the window and tried to process how completely my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I was secretly in love with my best friend. Now my best friend looked at me like I hung the moon over interstate highways. Emotionally, I was handling it terribly. "You're spiraling again," Miles said without looking away from the road. "How do you keep knowing that? You get this wrinkle between your eyebrows." I sighed dramatically. "That feels invasive. I've memorized your face, Brody." My heart immediately betrayed me again. That's an insane thing to say casually. Miles smiled slightly. "I'm done pretending to be normal about you." God. Every time he said things like that, it felt unfair that I was expected to continue functioning as a person afterward. The highway stretched emptier the farther we drove. Eventually, Miles lowered the music a little. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then decided honesty had already won this trip. "I think I'm scared to get attached to this." His expression softened instantly. "Too late," he murmured. That pulled a weak laugh out of me. But the fear underneath it stayed real. Because this wasn't some temporary crush anymore. This was Miles, my best friend, the person woven into every important part of my life already. If this went badly, it wouldn't just hurt. It would break something fundamental. I mean it. I admitted quietly. What if distance ruins this? Miles was silent for a second. Then he pulled the car into a quiet, scenic overlook beside the highway. I blinked. What are you doing? Come here. That worked on me once already. Brody. I smiled despite myself as he parked the car fully. Outside, the desert stretched dark and endless beneath the night sky. Cold wind rattled softly against the windows. Miles turned toward me fully in his seat. I need you to listen to me for a second, he said quietly. The seriousness in his voice immediately tightened my chest. Okay. He leaned one arm against the steering wheel, eyes fixed on mine. I know long distance is scary, he admitted. I know this probably would have been easier if we figured it out earlier. I nodded slightly. But, he continued carefully, I also know I've never felt this way about anyone before. The air in the car suddenly felt too warm again. Miles smiled faintly like he could see exactly what his words were doing to me. You're my favorite person, he said softly. You always have been. My throat tightened immediately. And now I finally know why. God. I looked down hard enough to gather myself before completely melting into the passenger seat. Miles reached over slowly and touched my hand. Hey. I looked back up. We don't have to solve the next 5 years tonight. I know. We just have to decide if this matters enough to try. The answer came to me instantly. Terrifyingly instantly. It does, I admitted quietly. Miles exhaled softly like he'd been holding his breath waiting for that. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Such a small word. But somehow it felt huge sitting there between us. Like the beginning of something real. Neither of us moved for a second. Then Miles smiled suddenly. What? We're really doing this. I laughed quietly. Apparently. You realize everyone in our lives is going to be unbearably smug. Oh my God. Especially Ava. I groaned immediately. Miles' younger sister had been accusing us of acting like an old married couple since college. She's never letting us live this down. She's going to demand financial compensation for being right. I smiled helplessly and leaned back against the seat. Then softer. This still feels unreal. Miles looked at me for a long moment. Then very quietly. Can I tell you the exact moment I knew I was completely screwed? My heartbeat jumped. Sure. He smiled to himself briefly before answering. You fell asleep in my apartment last winter. I frowned slightly. That happened a lot. Yeah. But this time, he shook his head softly. You were asleep on my couch, and it hit me that I'd never felt more at peace than when you were around. The warmth in my chest turned almost painful again. I remember sitting there thinking, if this person ever leaves my life, I'm going to feel it forever. I stared at him quietly, because I understood that feeling too well. Miles leaned closer slowly. Not rushed, not uncertain, just honest. You're not hard to love, Brody. That one nearly shattered me completely. Before I could stop myself, I reached for him. Miles met me halfway immediately. The kiss this time felt different from the motel room. Less hesitant, less surprised, still soft, still careful. But now there was certainty underneath it. Like we were finally allowing ourselves something we'd wanted for far too long. When we pulled apart, neither of us went very far. Miles smiled against my forehead lightly. You know, he murmured, this is objectively the worst possible timing. I laughed softly. Yeah. But I think I would have regretted staying silent forever. I looked at him honestly then. No, I said quietly. I think this would have haunted both of us. His expression softened immediately. Probably. Outside, cold wind moved across the empty overlook while cars passed far below on the highway. Inside the car, Miles kept his hand wrapped around mine like he already knew letting go would be difficult now. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath all the fear and uncertainty and impossible timing, one thing settled with complete, terrifying clarity. No matter what happened next, this had already changed everything forever.